All right, we're recording. This is the Gateway API meeting for March 24th. And we have a couple things to get through, but if anything wants to add anything to the agenda, feel free. The first thing I wanted to cover is yesterday, I finally went ahead and made a milestone for v0.3.0. In previous meetings, we kind of discussed that we really should have a 0.3.0 intermediate release before we hit v1 alpha 2. So 0.3.0 would allow us to do some cleanup and add a few more features before we get to v1 alpha 2 and start talking about breaking changes. And I'll say that we already have a number of breaking changes in the v1 alpha 2 milestone, but we haven't started on development of any of those. And I think it makes sense. Anyone can feel free to correct me on this, but I think it makes sense to go ahead and add whatever we want to do this one kind of last additive cleanup release, get a few things out of the way before we start shifting towards v1 alpha 2, because once we do, I want to make sure that, everything we do is focused on v1 alpha 2. And when we start making breaking changes, we don't have to also be focused on all the little bits of v1 alpha 1 cleanup we want to do. So with that, I added a whole bunch of things to the v0.3.0 milestone. My logic here was really kind of simple in the sense that anything that was relatively recent or useful that I thought was purely additive, things that additive or cleanup improvements in some way can fit into v0.3.0 from my perspective. And then anything that's breaking or in any way going to change experience, we should hold off till v1 alpha 2. And we also have a v1 alpha 2 milestone that has more significant changes in there. But with that said, I added a whole bunch of things here. I think any of the project owners can add, remove to a milestone at will. If you can't, just ping someone in Slack and we can help out. With that said, I wanted to run through some of these and see if there are actually things we want to focus on in this release. So again, this is just things that I think are either close or something like we should be considering in the near future. Purely additive improvements, etc. My goal before I go too far down this list is to get v0.3.0 out in around a month, which I know is, if you look at this list, aspirational. But I would rather get a release out in a month or so we can switch into v1 alpha 2 than absolutely hit everything in this milestone.
Rob, did we resolve what we're doing with respect to documentation and if we branch?
We have not for v1 alpha 2 yet.
Yeah.
So the last time this came up, the idea was that we'll do a final v1 alpha 1 release. That would be v0.3.0. And then we'll add v1 alpha 2 to the main branch. And at that point, we can also start finding ways to differentiate docs between v1 alpha 2 and v1 alpha 1. Maybe that just is a separate directory. We freeze docs for v1 alpha 1, throw it in a separate, archived directory, and then have v1 alpha 2 as the main docs going forward. I'm not completely sure what we want to do there.
I see. I was just looking at some of the items are docs updates, and it would be a shame to have to expand it to all the API docs as opposed to ones that pin to a particular version. But
oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and the scope of v0.3.0 is still entirely v1 alpha 1. So anything that we get in here, especially if their docs changes, is a single version, and it targets everything. Once we release v0.3.0, we have to start thinking about where doc updates apply, and if you need to cherry pick, or whatever doc updates back to a v1 alpha 1 docs site. Yeah, that's a good question. But yeah, my goal here, and anyone feel free to correct me or say we should do something else. But my goal here is to really try and get as much as we possibly can into the API in the next month. There are a few things that we've kind of just left sitting for a while, and I think it would be good to have some kind of starting point. The advantage of getting this into v1 alpha 1 as opposed to waiting and trying to throw it into v1 alpha 2 is it gives us a little bit of time, not a ton, but it gives us some time for implementations to test out a feature, get feedback on it. And if we determine that, hey, this field, this configuration, this way we design the API doesn't quite make sense, we have that short window to make a change to whatever we added here in v1 alpha 2. So I think the idea is we should try and get something in for a lot of these different areas, and then leave open the possibility of changing or improving in v1 alpha 2. But that's, again, just my perspective on this. Does anyone else have thoughts, ideas on this release process? Does it make sense to try and shove all these things in to v1 alpha 2, v1 alpha 1 as this kind of intermediate final release?
So v1, you're proposing sorry, I missed the date that you were proposing.
Yeah, so I have not put a due date here, but my goal is a month from now. Sometime in April would be. Yeah.
I see, like end of April.
Yeah. Yeah, which I'll be the first to say is rather aspirational, but I would like to push for this as much as possible.
My recommendation is that for the group to start assigning themselves out of this list and then just put a comment on rough sizing.
Yeah, and I do want to go through.
Like possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's part of this. I do want to go through this list and make sure what we have in here makes sense, or it doesn't make sense, we can bump it, or potentially we're missing things that need to be in here. And if we're missing things that really should be prioritized, I want to make sure that those are accounted for. So that's what I wanted to spend the majority of the meeting on, is just, here's what I think could fit in v0.3.0. But as we go through these, if there's things that are obviously missing or things that just don't make sense, it'd be good to know. And also, if you have capacity or know someone who does, this is also a call for help, because we've got lots and lots to do here. So if you have any ability to help.
Yeah, let's go through them. I already see like explore adding structure to docs.source. That's like rather open-ended, so probably we would want to kind of bump that out. Yeah,
well, actually, yeah, that yes, I mostly agree with that, but yeah, it's an open-ended doc issue, but I have a pretty clear idea of what I want to do with that. So
okay, all right.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll just start from the top. This is one that this again is not a critical thing, but it's one that John pointed out that I didn't even realize this was a thing. It's very cool. I have a PR that fixes this or adds this. It allows, if you add a category to your CRD, you can kubectl get gateway API. It's the category that I chose, will return all resources in that category. So you can see if you apply all our examples, you've got UDP route, gateway class, gateway, TCP route, and HTTP route, all output in the same way, which feels quite handy. Really tiny change, but seems like a good win. So that one's already on its way. Category and age columns, this is also on its way. That is that PR that I just went to. This is also a PR that's in progress, just needs a review. We have a lot of references to kubernetesigs.github.io. We don't need them anymore. They do an extra redirect, which doesn't help anyone. So this removes all those references. Again, just reviews on these would be really handy. I think they're pretty straightforward. Danian, this is your PR, update docs for fields of type local object reference. It's generally good to go. I just added the tiniest little nit here because somehow an extra tab or something got added in here. I don't know, but I'll approve it whenever you have a chance to take a look.
Yeah, I haven't looked at my PRs, so let me work on that and update my PRs this week.
Cool, thanks. This one is also a great request of improving usability here. Mark pointed out that, when you get a route, it'd be really helpful to see the gateways that are actually implementing that route. We have them hidden away in status, but we weren't exposing them with kubectl output. I added a PR that tries to address that. And we can cover some of these in PR and issue triage, but I think this would be a great improvement to try and work into 0.3.0. All right, so far we've gone through a lot of the easier ones. Now we're starting to get into, oh no, this is the issue that this PR fixes about. So also very similar, we also have a fix for it. Now we're starting to get into the somewhat more complicated ones. This one, distinguish custom and implementation specific support levels. We've had a couple discussions on this right now, and I think we mostly reached a conclusion that these are generally the same thing and we should move everything to implementation specific. Does that sound correct? Micah, it looks like you're the last one to comment. Maybe I'm misremembering the latest state on here.
Yeah, I haven't looked at this in a while.
Okay, so regular expression is implementation specific because, and filters are custom because it is completely optional to implement. And implementation specific means that everyone implements it, it's just going to be different per implementation. Is that what you're saying is the distinction here between custom and implementation specific?
Yeah, it's whether versus how.
Okay. So, okay, I can buy that. Maybe what we need here is a docs update to clarify this as opposed to combining the conformance levels, because those do seem sufficiently different. I am curious how many implementation specific things we'll have here like how many instances are we really going to want to differentiate between implementation specific and custom? Is it like, as an example, by saying something like as implementation specific, what if an implementation just can't support regex at all for some reason?
So that's why that's extended. I think like, yeah, we should clarify this in the docs. In my mind, implementation specific is a field that we say the behavior of this feature, so we have a feature which could be an extended, for example, regex, but there is a tiny part of it we're just saying that's going to be implementation specific. But if you support it, aside from that piece of it, it should always behave the same. Whereas custom is like, we say nothing about it. It's totally up to you. If that makes sense. Like, I think in the specific cases where we use implementation specific is just to pick out like a very small part of a given API that we can't really, it's not reasonable to just go all the way down into nitty gritty to make it work for all the providers. At least that's how it's been used. And implementation specific is actually like an API constant in the Ingress API.
Yeah, and keep in mind, it's really important to note this is implementation specific, meaning if you use it today and it works, and then you use it somewhere else and it works, maybe it's implemented, but it will have subtly different behavior on this other implementation. So it's critical to call that aspect of it out.
Yeah, like custom, I think is like a broader thing that's on a feature basis. So the distinction would be, because we don't want to have, for example, just to throw out regex into custom, because there is a uniform way that we're going to do it, but there is this one aspect that will, require a little bit more attention.
It sounds like we're trying to combine more than one thing here into a single word or I don't know, phrase, I guess. But it sounds like we're trying to combine both how many, if support for this is required by every implementation, and two, if support is portable across implementations.
I think it's a little bit more subtle than that. It's that we already have these three things, which is it has to be core, extended, and then custom. So custom, we basically say the API doesn't say anything. That's like your own thing. So then now we get left with the core and the extended. Now the core must be fully specified. The extended also must be fully specified. Actually, I take that back. I find implementation specific to be like cross-cutting across stuff. Although I think we should, as a general rule, make core not have implementation specific things. So basically, we're left with it's extended, which means that you have a choice of implementing the feature, but the API knobs that you use to actuate it are portable if that feature is supported. And then within that, there may be some situations just based on reality that we can't. It's still a very, very useful feature, but there are some pieces of that surface area that we simply just can't mandate down to the last sort of precise behavior. In which case, we can use implementation specific to say, hey, I know that this is not perfect, matching the real world. It's going to be implementation specific here, but the rest of the API is going to behave as we can expect.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying we should have 3 support levels, one being core, one being extended, and one being custom. And implementation specific can be a modifier on extended.
Yeah, that's kind of how I'm seeing it. regex is, I think, the canonical example. Like it feels weird to just, because we can't make it portable, just to kind of throw it out and not have any kind of patterns. At the same time, we just can't tell our users that there is a particular way to do things, because we know for sure that reality does not match that expectation.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Any volunteers to update this thread with a comment just covering that last discussion?
I will type something up. Which
Awesome.
one? 5:30. Does this require a doc
5:30.
update?
Mostly what it is I think right now we have some types that have implementation specific as a support level, and we don't.
I see. Okay, I will chase this one down then.
Okay.
Get it.
Awesome, thanks.
Just to be clear, are you saying custom implies implementation specific?
I mean,
That's
pretty much, but we don't even say anything about it. It's just like, it's whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah, I think custom implies the Wild West, which is implementation specific at minimum, and probably I don't know. I think implementation specific, if we look at it as more of a modifier, a keyword that we add as part of a extended support description, could help. But right now we're in a less than ideal place where we have 4 support levels in our types and only 3 documented. So at a minimum, we need to solve that. And I think the easiest way to solve that is, instead of adding a 4th support level, just indicate that implementation specific can be indicated on extended support level. I don't know. I will. I'll leave it to Bowie to follow up on this one. Let me just so you don't lose it. Actually, assign someone. Great. Okay, keep on going here. This is the one I was talking about before. I don't want to spend too much time on it. This one is, I think, really simple, and I just want to make sure we cover it. It's right now our doc source page, site source now, is so really flat, I guess is the way to say it. And a really simple change, in my opinion, is just to make the structure of this match the structure of our navigation. Because right now, you know, as our docs grow, this is just going to become more and more unmaintainable. And so sooner than later, updating the structure here to update our navigation seems like it would be a good win. I am very happy to take this one on, but if someone wants to, by all means, go ahead. I think this is easy, and also, if I don't mind, it doesn't have to be in 0.3.0, but if no one else does, I'll just do it. All right, load balancer source ranges. This was one that came up from a while ago, and it's, I think, a fairly good point in the sense that, again, I don't know how broadly this is going to be supported. Maybe this has to be an extended field, but this is something that we could really copy from the service API upstream with potentially limited changes. And it does seem like a valuable kind of config. I don't think this is the highest priority, but it does seem like one of the simpler things to port across. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I wonder if we should think about this in a more general fashion. Because that one is like a very targeted feature. It's worth discussing like what generally this would feel like. I'm assuming the proposal is to add it to gateway.
Yeah. Yeah, the proposal here is just lift and shift. Just take the exact thing that is in service and pull it over.
Yeah, we should evaluate a couple external traffic policy, load balancer source ranges, and see if there's some more organized way to do it. We probably would want to, if at all, avoid the situation where we simply just ended up with like everything again on gateway, and then it became kind of a puzzle to understand.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think somewhere down the list I have external traffic policy, which was I think the
let's
same
group
day,
those together
person.
as a discussion topic to figure out what is like the appropriate way to treat these in a more like up one level versus one at a time. Because I think one at a time, like I guess you could add it. It feels like each edition then just makes it more and more complicated, just slowly.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think these are both kind of not high priority items, but we do need to have a compelling answer for why we choose to port things from Service API up. So I get the hesitation. I get, the service resource in upstream has become very bloated. But one could argue that it's also trying to do a lot more things than Gateway is trying to do, at least the Gateway resource. So maybe, but yeah, this is a slippery slope. We can't just start porting every field from service to Gateway without a good rationale and long-term plan.
I think like the rationale is fine because there was a rationale for it to exist on service. The how is really what needs to be discussed.
Yeah.
So like we know for sure there's the use case exists because people use it, and we have to handle this kind of functionality. So then the question is the how.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other side of this is I guess it'd be helpful to run through some issues upstream for external traffic policy, load balancer source ranges, and see if there's common confusion, if there's room for improvement on these fields, there's feature requests related to them that the current structure just does not support. But I don't know that it's worth just renaming something or changing it slightly if it's going to do exactly the same thing. So the
issue is that there is right now for service, there is simply no pattern to accepting these things, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm looking for as a result of the process, is that like each one will be a sort of fights with the other fields, and then like the complexity is not, it needs to be addressed. It's like a one-off every time that we have a fairly small request for these.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. The next one I have in here is a relatively old one. Yeah, this goes back in time. Two-digit issue number. Add timeouts to destination connection details. This was at least partially addressed. Well, Danian, you have an open PR that covers some form of timeout and retries. This is an area that I know we've kind of punted for a while, but I'd like to revisit timeout configuration, as well as I thought I had retries on here. yeah, request retry. I guess this is your PR that I added in here. I know there's a lot of different ways to configure timeouts, and so this could potentially turn into bike shedding, where we're just, talking about every different way we can configure this. But I think, especially because we're still in V1 Alpha 1, it's worth trying to add something. Doesn't need to cover every possible use case, but if we have something as a starting point, I think that will help. So yeah, this has been an issue for a long time, something like that we knew we wanted in this API. We just need to take some time, work out a proposal, and try and get it in. All right, the next one is health checking. Also going back to the same general era around a year ago, and also agree that this is a high priority item. Health check behavior is particularly helpful when you have multiple routes pointing to the same service. Like, I think this is a good win. I am interested if there's anyone who's also really wanting to push on health check or has strong feelings about what health check configuration could look like. We have, some use cases in GK, we have some extra health checking configuration in our ingress support. I don't know if anyone else is doing any kind of custom health checking or has input on what we should do here.
We have some of this in Contour, where you can define active health checks against endpoints. We get the question a lot though, is what do you need it with Kubernetes? Because you could do the internal service health checks that way. But some of the things Contour was used for in the past was for non-Kubernetes endpoints. So that was why we kind of added it, the health check like VMs and stuff. That makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And we have some GK specific limitations or features, I guess, that make it more beneficial to have custom health check config as well. So yeah, this is probably not something like that's going to be used by everyone or every use case, but I think it's certainly a good win to have in place. Yeah, it'd be interesting to look. It's good to know that Contour is doing some custom health checking as well. It would be good to take a look at that config. Is that, Steve, is that just in your CR?
Yeah, it's in HTTP proxy.
Okay.
You can
cool.
define health checks
on
a service. Yeah.
Cool. All right, and the next one, support for external traffic policy. That's same as above, load balancer source ranges. The retry attributes, I think we've mostly covered this. Danian, I know you had started this PR quite a while ago. Is this something you have interest in reviving? Oh, I just noticed Danian dropped. So I'll follow up offline for that one. And then forwarding shortcut to gateway listener. I think this is a really easy, well, relatively easy one. The idea of, especially for TCP, being able to skip the route entirely and go direct from a listener to a backend. I think my default backend idea is not a great one, but maybe just the backend ref that I proposed here. We discussed this in a meeting probably, I don't know, a couple months ago, yeah, January. I think it's a relatively straightforward idea, but I want to revisit this and I want to try and push to get this in. Again, my goal here is to try to take some of these discussions that we've kind of just let sit for a while and revisit them and push to get something in in the next month, if at all possible. Just try and expand out. We've had a lot of good ideas that have kind of gotten stuck in proposal phase, and plenty of these proposals are good that just haven't turned into an implementation. And that's really what I'm trying to focus on and prioritize in the next month. So a lot of these issues already have some kind of conclusion or some guidance. If someone is interested in volunteering to work on one of these or lead the development, just assign yourself to the issue, and we can help out as far as review, working through concepts, ideas, whatever. But it'd be great to see some new contributors here and existing ones to just take on some of these individual issues. And then the last one, query param matching. I think this is one that's also stuck around for a while. There does seem to be some community support for this. It seems like a relatively straightforward thing to add. We just need to, again, work on getting an implementation in place for this one. All right, so I've spent a lot of time going through everything that I threw into the 0.3 milestone. Are there things in here that feel like they don't belong? Or maybe more importantly, are we missing things that we really should be trying to work on in the next month?
That's already a lot, Rob.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
My thought was like we might even have to triage.
Yeah,
but
I absolutely agree. Yeah, I think we're probably going to have to drop some of this, but I wanted to start with a relatively wide net and be ambitious, see what we can get in. And if some don't get in, then that's okay. But if there are specific issues in this list that you really want to push for, that are really interesting to you and think should be part of the API sooner than later, assign yourself and really try and push forward on them, because I would love to expand the scope of this API, not even scope of this API, but the capabilities of this API just a little bit. We have all these little details that we've been talking about for a while that we just have not added implementations for. So we have this opportunity to get new features in, get some basic feedback, and still potentially break that initial implementation in a V1 Alpha 2 release. So I'd like to take this opportunity to expand the capabilities as much as reasonably possible. But I absolutely agree. This is probably larger in scope than we'll be able to accomplish, but let's see what we can get in. All right, I will keep on moving then. There's a few PRs to run through and some issue triage as well. Yeah, let me hold off on this one. This is one that I've been pretty interested in for a while, and we spent a bunch of time on it last week, so I'll come back to it if we have time. John, you raised an issue that I think deserves some broader conversation here. Route status when multiple controllers are involved. I don't think we have a great answer for this yet, other than maybe we need a controller name. And the gateway ref. John, do you have any more context on this one, or can you explain this a little bit more?
Yeah, I was just implementing status in our implementation, and I was thinking like how I can actually clean up old references, like if the gateway was removed or something. And there's really no way to know which ones are owned by you or which ones are owned by someone else. So if I see that there's gateway A, B, C, D, but I only know about A and B, I have no way of knowing if I should be cleaning up C and D or if that's because someone else is owning C and D. So like you mentioned, we need something. I don't know what's normal for this on things that have kind of a shared status, but it seems like we need like a controller reference or something. I'm not sure that how this is best solved, but it seems like right now it's hard to implement.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as ugly as it is, I think that a controller reference or controller name in this status is probably, so each status, each item, each element in the list has a gateway reference.
I guess we need to indent it one more or something.
I don't know that we need to indent necessarily. I think indent could just, that actually would work. But what I was thinking is instead of indentation, just add a controller name to the gateway ref. But yeah, and the indentation will do the same thing.
Actually, that's true, because a given gateway can't be controlled by two things. That would be a little bit out of control, and we don't allow it.
Yeah. Yeah, so a given gateway can only be implemented by a single class, and a single class can only be implemented by a single controller. So it seems reasonable to have just a controller name associated with that gateway. It's a little bit messy, it's one of those things where the gateway should theoretically be unaware of the controller that's managing it. It should just know the class. But I think it is for a very compelling reason here. There's no other great way to make sure resources are cleaned up. Cool. I think actually I know this milestone is just getting ridiculous, but I think this would be a good one to try and fit in.
Just to be clear, what does it mean for a controller to be removed?
It's not necessarily controllers removed, right? It's like if, say, I had gateways A, B, C, D, referencing this gateway, and then my controller shuts down for a day or whatever, and it comes back up and it sees that the status says that we have A, B, C, and D, but in reality, I'm only seeing an A and B gateway. So the question is, should I remove C and D from the status, or do I not see C and D because they're owned by another controller that I'm not watching all their gateways?
Don't you know, though, that I guess, oh, I see.
This is assuming that the controller does not have state, it's starting up fresh.
Yeah, and it may, like, I agree. I think what you were trying to go with is that in theory, like in some cases, maybe it could know about all gateways by even ones owned by other controllers. But I don't think that's necessarily always the case.
It sounds like, though, that their controller might have a bug because you should be using finalizers, and if you're, yeah, like you basically kind of abandoned a gateway in some ways.
How would
like let's C disappeared and the controller had no idea that it disappeared and it actually owned it?
No, what the suggestion here is that C disappeared when the controller was not running.
Right, but the finalizer should take care of that. Like C should not disappear.
So that would require us to make our controllers effectively like stateful, sort of.
Well, you keep
like,
the state as the finalizer.
But why do we want to block? Like, do we really want to block gateway deletions? Like, we have to update all routes when a gateway is deleted synchronously?
Yeah, because how else are you maintaining the status if you're up?
Everything's async. That's what I was planning to do, at least. This is, to be honest, my first time. We don't implement status for our non-gateway resources, so.
So the thing is, you probably are use a finalizer or a finalizer equivalent if you're keeping the state somewhere else, because like you're a bad citizen, I guess, if you just kind of abandon things. And then the other issue that this would bring up is that who is responsible for deleting the orphaned ones? Like, how do you know that you should delete it, or someone else should delete it, or everyone should delete it? And then that it's
Well,
not
right.
a terrible idea, but like it's just like then you would have these weird error messages like I tried deleting, you know, XYZ status and actually someone got there first.
Well, that was the idea with this controller fee, like adding a controller so you knew that these are things that I should clean up. And if they don't have my controller name, I should leave them alone.
Right. Yeah, I would like to weigh it against the fact that you do need finalizers to properly clean up versus adding a finalizer-ish concept or some kind of tagged, like a metadata basically that the controller can tag onto the status.
I'm still confused because you have your gateway class saying this is the controller, and then you have a gateway saying this is my class, and you have a route saying this is the gateway. So you can trace from your route to the controller on the gateway class. And as long as you have a gateway class saying this controller is the controller for this gateway class, then you know whether or not the controller is actually running, whether you have a pod that's actually performing the responsibility of the controller, you're saying I have this controller, and you can trace to that from the route.
Right, but if the gateway is now removed, then we can't trace it, right? Because there's no gateway to look up.
Right,
Okay.
but technically you should have a finalizer to handle that.
Well, the controller though should have said the gateway's gone and it belongs to the class that names me as responsible for that gateway, so I have to clean it up, right?
Right, but that's assuming that the controller is synchronously handling all gateway deletion events and that it has 100% uptime, or like Bo is saying, using a finalizer.
I think
Yeah.
you should have a finalizer anyways. At least that's how we handled all of the other equivalent deletion things.
In Ingress, do people use finalizers typically for their status updates?
Oh yeah. Well, at least we do. I don't know about other people.
Yeah, it's just kind of annoying in like at least in cluster control planes if people do things like delete Istio system namespace or equivalent, and then your whole cluster is like screwed up by the finalizers being stuck around forever. It's something we see a lot with finalizers. You wouldn't see that probably with the GKE controller because it's out of the cluster, so you don't really have that issue. But we've been trying to avoid finalizers for that reason.
Oh, but then you end up with the other issues.
Yeah.
At least we found that finalizers, yes, so finalizers can be broken. Then you have to put more finalizers everywhere. Like, I mean, yeah, if people break it, I guess it's hard to prevent them. But then they would just force delete the route anyways, I'm assuming, like if they're in that mode.
Just to say the other side of this, do these approaches need to be mutually exclusive? Like I agree that a finalizer could help with a lot of this, but at the same time, let's say a finalizer doesn't catch something, like I don't know, someone bypasses a final, whatever. Having a controller in the reference here could still help.
Yeah, like the other thing, the thing is, it doesn't prevent orphan status, like because the controller could never come back. So it doesn't necessarily fix that. I think it seems okay. Like I'm trying to think of how we could get in trouble with adding the field. Probably not much.
Yeah,
but we should still definitely recommend that people use finalizers because otherwise you're kind of being a bad citizen of their Kate's environment.
Yeah, even as
It-
someone, let's say someone is trying to manually clean up and they say, hey, I don't have this controller anymore. Is it safe to remove these items? And a visual check says, yes, these two gateways were tied to this specific controller that you don't have anymore. I mean, this is a real edge case. I'll say that, but it feels like it's a very minimal addition that adds some potential reliability and capability.
It kind of seems to me like there should be a gateway class controller that cleans up any gateway entries and routes where those gateways no longer exist. And if an implementation does need to do cleanup work, then it can add a finalizer. Otherwise, though, it does seem like maybe there should be a higher level controller.
I don't
to
think we
handle
can
that
assume that there's any one person that can read all the gateways and do such a high level cleanup. At least for us, we allow like multiple config sources. You can have multi-cluster, you can have file configs. So it seems tricky to expect that one controller can see everything, especially once you get into like RBAC considerations, etc.
Right. I think like if I'm understanding the suggestion, it's basically there's some system level like endpoint slice controller or something that just is kind of doing the garbage collection of the status. That's like a nice
yeah,
to
that's
have.
what I had in mind. That's what I had in mind. Yeah.
I think like given the way we spec it, it is possible to write that controller in a generic way. Is it required?
Okay, so
I don't know.
So one of the things we've said so far is that users of this API can provide or implement custom route types. I don't think we've explored this. I don't think this is very likely, but maybe some implementation in the future wants to implement a custom gateway type. That would be very difficult to support by some generic controller cleaning up. Again, I hate to even suggest that that could happen, but you know, worst case. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. I think short term, I think this adds some level of value and at a minimal cost.
Yeah, it seems mostly benign.
Yeah. And I also agree that we should document that in our implementation guidelines that finalizers are highly recommended for cleaning up these kinds of things. Cool. I will leave it at that. But feel free to add more comments on the issue as well. Conditions for backend policy. This is another one that came up relatively recently. Yeah, the backend policy is difficult, and we have not had a good. This feels related to what we were just discussing on the other one. That if we want to have meaningful conditions on a backend policy, those conditions need some kind of ownership, some kind of clear understanding of which controller dropped that condition there. And so far, our answer has been, well, instead of that, just put your conditions on the route or gateway. None of this is great. I don't have a great short-term solution for this. But if anyone has ideas, very open to them. I'll leave that one alone, but yeah, if anyone thinks of something here, this is certainly a weakness of backend policy or any kind of resource we have where we have lots of different controllers potentially interacting with it. The other two we've already covered, and I think we've also covered issues from last week. So in our last couple minutes, I want to cover some of the PRs that are in flight right now. The new ones this week are actually, I think from me, this is a really annoying one. Mark's feedback that we really should have gateways bound to kubectl output, like shown in kubectl output for routes, made a lot of sense to me, but it's really annoying to implement. I spent some time, I worked through this with some folks from API Machinery to make sure this is actually truly not possible any other way. And unfortunately, it looks like we are stuck with a new API field if we want anything like this, due to the limitations of additional printer columns that this maps to. So my suggestion here is to add a new string slice that is the list of gateways that have admitted the route. So this is basically a much shorter truncated version of gateways of this route gateway status list, because there's unfortunately no way to translate this to kubectl output using CRD mechanisms without printing the entire struct. So anyways, that is the gist of this PR. It's really unfortunate. There's some more details and background on things I tried in the issue. But unfortunately, I think that's what we're stuck with for now. But yes, I tried all the various things, but if you dig into the Kubernetes code implementing this, it just doesn't, it has the most basic implementation of matching that exists. And so it only supports the most basic JSON path implementation. And that is intentional for now. But anyways, yeah, so that's that issue. I would appreciate some feedback or some ideas here. I do hate to add another field just for kubectl output, but this feels like a really valuable thing to have in the output and would make our API a lot easier to understand. This was at least partially inspired by some of the feedback we saw just watching TGIK there and seeing, how confusing this relationship is, and having this output as part of kubectl would be a huge win, I think.
Yeah, I agree. But that's unfortunate from API Machinery.
Yes.
Did we look into if we could extend kubectl? I know that's not an easy task at all,
Yeah.
but it seems like it'd be extremely useful for us and for everyone else.
Yeah, I do need to revisit that. There are a few things. Unfortunately, the additional printer columns implementation, as I understand it, actually is driven by API server. So like without getting too far into this, if you were to use kubectl and specify additional columns or a JSON path, advanced JSON paths work perfectly. It's this specific component, which is the additional printer columns that's implemented by API server, that has the much stricter limitations on what it will send back. And so kubectl itself has support for lots of things, but unfortunately, because this would be an API server edition, it would be a while. There's one PR that was open for around a year and eventually closed because it rotted, that somewhat helped here. But even still, that was not perfect. So yeah, I think it would be good to support this in upstream, but I don't have the capacity right now to push it forward. But the fix is simple-ish in upstream. It just requires someone to push it through. Cool. Well, I know we're past time, so thank you, everyone. If you have time to pick up issues in the 0.3 milestone or review some of the PRs that are up, it'd be really appreciated. Otherwise, we'll talk to you next week. Have a great one.